I think we'll start. My name is Mike Rempel, and I direct John Jay College's Data Collaborative for Justice. If you are here for a webinar on a new jail population dashboard, you're in the right place. Today's headliner will be Liz Johnson, and in a few minutes, I'll turn it over to her for about 30 minutes to give us a walkthrough. Liz, we created the dashboard we'll be talking about today while with us at the Data Collaborative for Justice. She also now serves as a data scientist at the Clean Slate Initiative. Our panel also includes our data scientist, Tao Lin, also known as Richie Lin, and Associate Director of Research, Joanna Weill. Why did we at the Data Collaborative for Justice create yet another data dashboard? The answer is we wanted to help New Yorkers understand the city's progress or lack thereof in closing the documented inhumane jails on Rikers Island. Now, I'm imagining many of you in this webinar already know this, but just to ground us, I'm going to give a bare outline of the plan to close Rikers. It has 5 components. Closing Rikers. A city law now bans jailing people on the island past August of 2027. Number 2, new jails. Smaller, modern jails are to be built in each of the city's 4 large boroughs. They are to have a combined capacity of 3,300 people per day. Number 3, jail reduction. City leaders are accountable for safely and effectively reducing the daily population below 3,300. Number 4, renewable Rikers. The island is to be transformed into a green infrastructure hub in place of the jails. Number 5, community reinvestment. A community reinvestment commission exists and has already recommended an array of investments in communities disproportionately harmed by over-incarceration over the years. These recommendations need to be implemented. The dashboard's homepage has details and links about all of this. Okay, so again, component 3, jail reduction. We said the new jails can only house up to 3,300 people in the initial plan. But the Adams administration has increased this capacity to nearly 3,900 people and is also building space for over 300 in off-jail city hospitals for people with serious medical and mental health needs. So 3,900 plus 300 equals 4,200. Now, some of you may have read higher jail capacity numbers than 4,200. I actually read a higher number in an article just a few days ago. That is inaccurate. The reason for this is that there are literally more beds than 4,200, which can be confusing, but about 7% of them are surplus capacity and not in use in any given day. So again, the jail population needs to go to 3,300 on the initial plan or 4,200 on the Adams plan. But regardless, today's jail population is higher than 3,300 and 4,200. In fact, the Department of Correction previously projected the population would reach almost 7,400 in September of 2024. That did not happen. We now know that DOC's projection overestimated this past September's jail population by nearly 900 people. Okay, that's set up, that's the plan, target jail numbers. And now, Liz, why don't you walk us through where we're at today?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for all of that context. For those of you who kind of are still trickling in, my name is Liz Johnson, and I am the data scientist who created the tool that we're going to go over today, in close collaboration, of course, with Mike, and my colleague Richie. Um, Mike, sorry, can you just let me know that you can see my screen?
Yes, I think you're good.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, I'll get started. Okay, so this is the homepage of our newest dashboard that tracks the New York City jail population, going all the way back to June of 2016, and gets updated every single day as new data becomes available to the public through a data source on the New York City Open Data Portal. And I'll talk a little bit more about the data used to fuel this dashboard a little bit later. But first, I just want to kind of reiterate what Mike said about the homepage on our dashboard. It is littered with resources that Mike put together for users to learn more about um, the effort to close Rikers and why Rikers Island is a problem in the first place, along with strategies that we believe can successfully and significantly shrink the jail population to the target capacity needed to legally close Rikers by the mandated deadline of August 2027. Um, so once you enter our dashboard, this is what you will see. Um, we gave the users a high level overview of the findings that we will see in the other sections navigable by this top nav button here. Um, so as of yesterday, November 20th, there's 6,647 people incarcerated in New York City jails on Rikers Island. We also provide the user with just a general overview of the trends in the past 30 days. So on average, we saw 6,612 people incarcerated on any given day in the last 30 days. And in addition, we want to make sure that we're surfacing the 1 year projections that I created that will be in the future projections tab here to users who just might not have time to dig into the weeds. But currently, our projections saying that in the absence of new policy reforms, we project that the population will continue to increase over the next year. And we estimate the population will be 6,769 people in November 2025. As you scroll down on the homepage, you will see, just as Mike kind of outlined it for us, context on setting the scene of the effort to close Rikers Island, including a bunch of hyperlinked resources that people should definitely take the time to dig into. In addition to setting the scene, we want to make sure that our users understand that we believe at the Data Collaborative for Justice that there are strategic ways to reduce the jail population. And we bucket those into 4 different categories. As you can see, pretrial decision making, case processing, diversion investments, and critical tools and support. Lastly, on the homepage, you'll also see an interactive timeline outlining the events leading up to the effort to close Rikers Island. And so a user can kind of like linearly go through these events beginning in 2014 using the arrow, the forward and the back arrow. But you can also use this timeline feature below to further investigate different events in our timeline that you may be interested in. Again, there's so many resources all throughout this feature of our homepage as well. So shameless plug, check it out. It's a great resource to have. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the data heavy content of our dashboard, starting first with the recent population trends section. So I want to start with this section just in case people aren't familiar with the behavior of the jail population, historically speaking. But this section will report on the average daily population going all the way back to June of 2016. And again, updates every single day as new data is published to the open data portal. So the data set that we use is actually published by the Department of Corrections on the open data portal, and it is called the Daily Inmates in Custody. Now, the biggest problem, in my opinion, with this data set, besides its name, is that it is only a daily snapshot. So every single day, the previous day's data is overwritten, and researchers don't have access to information that happened historically. Research institutes in New York have been collecting this data for some time now. However, at the Data Collaborative, we have not. And so over the past year, we have stood up an entire data warehouse. Real big shout out to my colleague, Richie, for helping me stand this environment up to collect that data every single day. And then another big shout out for a bunch of other institutes and researchers in New York that helped us actually get a backlog of that daily data going all the way back to June 2016. So the first thing that you'll see in this tab are just summary statistics for the previous 30 days, including what was the current daily jail population as of our latest data point, which is usually always the previous day's data. So November 20th is the latest data that we have. We also will aggregate it again to 30-day averages and then compare that to the previous 30-day period as well as what was happening a year ago, just to get an overall sense for the trend that we're going in. As you scroll down, you'll actually see our historical data over time and what that looks like, on top of a bunch of important policy and world events, including the implementation of Raise the Age, of bail reform, the COVID-19 pandemic, the Less is More Act, and the beginning of the Adams administration. Users can also actually select different start and end dates to adjust this graphics x-axis accordingly. And you can also expand all of the graphics throughout this dashboard and save them to your local machine if you're interested in including these in reports or emails or anything. So we break down this historical view one step further into a group called population status. And now this is a variable that we actually created at the Data Collaborative using a variable called the inmate status code, which is available in the DOC's source data set. This has created four main buckets that categorize people into detention categories, I guess. So the people who are currently incarcerated due to a pretrial detention, those who are serving a jail sentence, who are incarcerated due to a parole violation, or if someone is awaiting transfer to an upstate prison to serve their prison sentence. And any other person incarcerated that doesn't fall into those four main buckets is bucketed into these additional groups. On top of all of this great data and visualization, we also wanted to make sure that we gave the users qualitative information to help kind of digest and give additional context to what's going on. So you'll see here to the left some bullet points with metrics that will automatically update as the data changes and tells us some key facts that we wanted to raise attention to. So here you'll see in the last 30 days, 80% of the jail population were incarcerated for pretrial detention, which is actually 10 times higher than the second largest population status group, which is jail sentences. Another thing I actually forgot to call out, I know, sorry guys, this is so much content, it's very heavy, so stick with me, is most of these graphics are have these like hover of capabilities that will give you more information about the data point that you hover over. If you are interested in this graphic, but you feel like the pretrial detention group is kind of skewing these smaller population statuses below, we even allowed the user to remove this population group so that you can kind of get into the weeds with the smaller groups and see the change month over month. Now, I also wanted to make sure that users got information about what's happening at the daily level, not just the monthly level for our population data. So here you'll see a month-to-month comparison of the daily population, with the default being the current month as compared to the previous month. So in this light blue shaded region, you'll see the daily population trends for the month of October as compared to the data for the daily population of November. And as we get more and more data, you will see more and more points append to this dark blue line. And so you can see that on the 20th day of November, there are 22 more people in the jail population as compared to the 20th day in October. All right, last section on this tab, and one that I am really excited for, is a downloadable data table that includes aggregate population going all the way back to June of 2016, both as a total, but broken out by all of the variables that we have in our set. So if you hover over this table, you'll see a download button that you can download to your local device as a CSV and conduct your own analyses, your own projections, your own visualizations on. Again, I feel like this is something that's really kind of like lacking, especially because the DOC overwrites their data every single day. So come here, download the data, play around with it, and do your own investigation. Okay, so that is all the great content of the recent population trends tab. And now I'm kind of going to go into the meat and potatoes of our dashboard, which is the future projections. So I think it's over a year ago at this point, the Data Collaborative for Justice was approached because the Department of Corrections published a projection that seemed a bit outrageous at the time. And they asked us if we could fact check it. And this is kind of the beginning of this entire project. And so a year later, after trying to iterate through model after model, I decided to use an ARIMA-based model to project the jail population 1 year into the future. So we're projecting 12 30-day periods into the future. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what an ARIMA model is, it's a statistical method that is widely used to predict stock prices, to predict daily sales, any sort of time series data set. And it's all based off of the historical data in the time series data itself. We took it a couple steps further in our modeling to also include seasonal or cyclical components and very exogenous factors, so outside variables that could potentially influence the jail population. So those would be things like crime and arrest counts, admission counts, court administrative data, things like that. And one of the biggest advantages to an ARIMA model is that it offers a greater transparency and interpretability for users as compared to more advanced like black box models, machine learning models. That tend to offer higher accuracy, but most of the time, nobody knows what's under the hood of that model. They cannot tell you how one variable relates to the other, and therefore relates to our dependent variable, which would be jail population. So enough about that. We can kind of talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A section if people are interested. But again, if you don't have time to dig into the things that are on this tab, the one section you should focus on is this first section, full of all the kind of the summary statistics. So we actually project that in the absence of policy reforms, that in 6 months from now, so in May of 2025, there will be 6,721 people incarcerated. That is 109 more people than are currently incarcerated now. And then in a year from now, in November of 2025, we project there to be 6,769 people, which is 157 more people than are currently incarcerated. As you scroll down, you'll start to see the historical average daily population chart that we saw in the previous tab, in addition to our projections, which is here in red. Now, we wanted to make sure that the audience and users understand that with projections like this, there will always come some level of uncertainty. And therefore, we included both the 80 and 95% confidence intervals outputted by our model. And you can see that in the dark and the light gray regions here. We also included, we thought it would be really important to include this section to report the performance of our projections over time. So here you'll see a chart a graph that includes um, the projections that we made 6 months ago, which is this line in purple, the first 6 data points of our current projection in red, and the historical jail population, which is in blue. I think that there are two key things that I personally would take away from this section. One of which is the accuracy of our projections 6 months ago. So that would be comparing this purple line here, the first 6 points of this purple line, to the factual data that we collected after the fact. And you can see by comparing these two lines that our projection actually did a pretty good job at predicting the future jail population. However, it does slightly underestimate um, the value of the jail population. And I believe on average, you can see here, it's underestimating by about 70 people. Oops, sorry, for any given 30-day period. Now, the second really important thing that this section does is tracking the change of our predictions over time, of our projections over time. And so here you can see that 6 months ago, we actually projected the jail population to be smaller than what we're currently projecting by about 250 people, or about 300. So this could indicate that based off of these first 6 months, we kind of underestimated them. They're higher than we anticipated, so our model is adjusting accordingly and is increasing its value. So one would say we're not going in the right direction. There's also a table down here that will compare point to point, so you don't actually have to hover over each of these points to compare and calculate the difference. We do that here in the table below. So not only do we provide users with the projection of the average daily jail population, but we also included the projections for the various exogenous variables or external factors that we used in our modeling process. And so here you'll actually see, my screen's not big enough, but there are 6 plots for the exogenous variables that we used, which are total misdemeanor, nonviolent felony, and violent felony crime and arrest counts, aggregated to the 30-day period. So yeah, I think this is just such a value out of the dashboard that not only are we projecting jail population, we're also giving users access to the projections of crime and arrest variables in New York City. And below, again, we wanted to make sure that everyone had access to the actual data. So again, downloadable data sets for the projections, in addition to their margins of error. For the dependent variable, which is the first one, the average daily population. And then you can toggle and switch between the various exogenous variables that we have above to see the outputs there. So that is all the good stuff on the future projections tab. Now I'm going to go talk about what we've laid out for you guys on the racial and gender disparities tab. So the Department of Corrections classifies people in their custody according to a few different categories: race, gender, and mental health designation, which some of us might call Brad H status. One note that I want to raise before moving forward is in regard to the race category. So DOC reports the following races: white, Black or African American, Asian, American Indian or Alaskan Native, and other. So this is not an ethnicity variable. They do not specify anyone of Hispanic origin. However, just based off of past data collaborative work and our experience both with the public data set and data privately shared to us by the Department of Corrections, which does include ethnicity, we know that the majority of those people categorized as other are Hispanic, but we didn't want to change the coding of the variables. So just take that into consideration as I present some of the findings in this section. So the first thing that you're going to see, again, are the summary statistics for the last 30 days. which tells us that the majority of people currently incarcerated in New York City jails are non-white, they're men, and they are people who have received mental health services. If you're interested in learning more about each of these subsections, you can do so by clicking on the tabs here. Um, the largest section would be the racial disparities. This first section here, we just try to outline the current racial composition of people currently incarcerated. So we further break down that 92% of people incarcerated being non-white into the various race categories, which you can see with these sub-bullets here. We've also wanted to create a visual depiction of that. So this is a 10 by 10 grid. And so each person in this grid represents 1 percentage point. So you will see 59 blue little people represents 59% of the people incarcerated being Black. We also look at the historical view of the racial demographics over time, and where someone might think that this graphic is not compelling, it doesn't tell us much, I would beg to differ. I think that it really paints the picture that the racial composition of people incarcerated over the past 8 years has remained relatively stagnant, with the majority of people being incarcerated being Black. And as you can see, so this is kind of ranked by the quantity, the raw quantity of that percent total for each of these groups. So the group for American Indians and Asian people sometimes gets lost all the way up here. So I want to call out that we do have interactive legends throughout this dashboard that you can use to kind of select subgroups in our graphics. And if you want to reset it, you just kind of click away. We took it one step further by incorporating the US Census data for New York City to calculate incarceration rates and disparities. So I want to draw your attention to this table here. This is for the past 30 days in New York City jails. This is the jail population by each of our races and as a total, as compared to the New York City general population from the most recent American Community Survey. Using these two metrics, we can then calculate the incarceration rates. So if we focus on Black individuals, I would read this as 21 Black individuals are incarcerated per 10,000 Black residents in New York City. And the corresponding number of people will be shown in the visual to the left. To calculate the racial disparities and to visualize them, we created this bubble chart here. But the racial disparities is basically the ratio of incarceration rates from one group as compared to the other. And this graphic will actually compare the group on the vertical axis or the y-axis as compared to the group on the horizontal axis or the x-axis. And the larger the bubble, the larger the racial disparity. And the darker red the bubble means that the group on the y-axis is incarcerated at a higher rate than the group on the x-axis. So the largest disparity that we see in this graph is amongst Black and Asian people. And you can hover over this and you can see that are incarcerated at rates almost 18 times higher than Asian people in New York City. We try to do the same exact thing for gender disparities. So once you enter the gender disparities subsection, you will see a historical trend line tracking the number of women and men in custody going all the way back to 2016. And users can toggle between their population group of interest, and they can also change whether or not we're reporting the raw number of people as opposed to the percent of the total population in custody. And one major thing I wanted to call out here is this bullet change over time. And so we can see that the number of men and the number of women in New York City jails going all the way back to 2016 have changed like relatively proportional to one another. So they've decreased about 32 or 33 percentage points. However, in the last year alone, that is not the case. The number of women currently in custody have increased much higher than the number of men. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to call that out as an important finding throughout creating this dashboard. And again, we incorporate the US Census data to create incarceration rates and rate ratios or relative disparity quantities. So, as one might assume, the New York City general population is relatively split in half, men and women. It's about 50-50. And you can see that here in these two bar charts. However, that is not the case in New York City jails. Many more men are incarcerated than women. Um, Men are actually incarcerated at rates almost 15 times higher than women. Um, and men are incarcerated, so about 20 men are incarcerated for every 10,000 male residents in the city, as opposed to about one woman being incarcerated per 10,000 um, women residents. Lastly, is mental health services or mental health designation. Again, some people might refer to this as Brad H status. And this signifies whether a person received mental health services while in custody of the Department of Corrections. And the term Brad H originates from a lawsuit filed against New York City in the late 1990s. But you can see here that in the last 30 days, more than 1 in 2 people in jail, so over 50% of the people currently incarcerated, received a mental health service during their incarceration. Um, and this has increased both in the last year, but in the past 8 years. So that is a lot, or that is all of the heavy data findings that you will see throughout our dashboard. The final thing that I just really want to call out for anyone who's interested in learning more about the data that we used or about the methods that we used in our projections or just in the metrics calculated in the population trends or the disparities tab, please check out the data and methods section, especially the future projection section. I worked really hard on this one. It is a very long write-up of all of the models that we used or thought of using, a bunch of descriptive analyses um, on both the dependent variable here being the average daily jail population, um, and the exogenous variables that we collected from the New York City Open Data Portal. Um, and if you are interested in actually visiting the GitHub repository that I put together, that includes all of the code to calculate all this stuff, that is also linked in this area. And if we don't end up getting to your questions in the Q&A section, to come also check out this discussion page where you can kind of drop new questions, start discussions with community members. I will best to answer your questions in a timely manner, especially if we do not get to them today. Um, but I will pause because that is a lot to digest, and I will hand it back over to Mike to get us started with the Q&A.
Okay, Liz, thank you so much. This wasn't the plan,
Yeah.
but I'm going to give you the first question if that's okay. I want to go back to the I want to go back to the projections, Liz. Just for everyone, I wonder if you could walk us through once more. So you said this is an ARIMA model, and then you said there's a thing called exogenous variables. Just for user friendly, I wonder if you could go through once more, like basically in the end, what are the factors that you incorporate to project the daily jail population? If you want, maybe also what were some factors you kind of tested and thought maybe would work, but then they didn't in your testing?
Yeah, of course. So I'll try to keep it high level, but basically an ARIMA model. Um, so I actually ended up using I call it a Seri Max model. I'm not sure what other data scientists call it, but it's basically a seasonal, autoregressive, integrated, moving average model with exogenous variables. Um, But to the core, it's really an ARIMA model with a few extra components. And an ARIMA model is a tool or a model that basically just uses the historical patterns in the time series data to project what's going to happen in the future. And so time series data, if people are not familiar with that term, that's things like I said, like monthly sales of an item, daily temperatures, or 30-day average daily jail populations. So the Seri Max model has everything that an ARIMA model has, except it incorporates seasonality and allows for extra information to be inputted to help increase accuracy. And so our exogenous variables, or that extra information, are external variables that exert a significant influence over the time series data itself, which in this case is the jail population. And so you can think of those things being crime and arrests, admissions into DOC custody, discharges, the average length of stay while in custody, so on and so forth. I decided to go with the Seri Max model for a couple of reasons. One being the seasonal component. It allows for repeating patterns over months or over years, and the ARIMA model can't. In addition to that, including exogenous variables can give the model some contextual awareness. So this will tell us kind of like what is actually driving the changes in the jail population, not accounting for like historical trends. Uh, but overall, the Seri Max model can really help us make a more reliable, a more accurate model that can be used for decision making. Um, that being said, it took us so long to launch this dashboard because it took me so long to decide which exogenous variables we should choose. And so I basically grabbed all the variables that I could get from the New York City Open Data Portal. Whether that would be, like I said, admissions and discharge counts, crime S counts, average length of stay. And the thought process behind that was to almost recreate the progression of events that occurs in the criminal legal system, right? So a crime occurs, an arrest may or may not happen after that, which may or may not lead to someone being detained in a New York City jail. And so I wanted to try and replicate those methods into our cross-validation and just like model training that we did. However, we decided to not use all those variables, obviously. We only used crime arrest counts, and that was because we were prioritizing something called the out of sample error. And this basically measures the ability for our model to predict data that it's never seen before. And that helped us prioritize accuracy in the long run. And it just so happened that the exogenous variables that I showed you guys that were available on the future projections tab gave us that model that was the most accurate.
Thank you, Liz. So Richie, I'm going to ask the next question to you, but I'm going to segue off of what Liz just said. So it's a model, it was tested. It doesn't just predict the future jail population with the past jail population. It uses other factors around crime and arrest trends. But yet Liz showed us that the projection is different than it was 6 months ago. It's actually projecting a little higher than it was 6 months ago. And so as a data scientist, I want to get your take. Why is it so hard to predict local jail populations, even with, a model that Liz has worked on and that's about as accurate as we can make it without a machine learning approach? Yet it's difficult and it's not on target. And then why is this valuable anyway?
Yes, of course. So this is the important question. So statistical modeling or machine learning modeling, they use data to project the future or to make inform insight between the relationship in the natural occurred events. Like, for example, the jail population has a correlation with weekly arrest, or all of those kind of criminal justice numbers. It's well, it's a very important tool to project the future, but it's not magic. It cannot tell you precisely what is the future look like. The many statisticians and data scientists been improving the models. We introduce more and more complex model to improve the accuracy and precision. But and especially calling out to Liz, she did such a rigorous job in testing all of those models and variable combinations. So I think our model is doing a extraordinary job to the accuracy. But still, working in criminal justice field for a few years, there's a lot of data limitation that we can use to further improve the accuracy or efficiency of this model. For example, the volume and the granularity we use to build this model is not on the same scale of like more commonly used commercial data science model. For example, in the website, the web browser actually track your behavior on how many clicks before you make the purchase decision. So this kind of level is far beyond, is far richer, far more informative than the data we collect from the New York City Open Data Portal, and it's updated weekly with only limited variables and pretty much like one person a row. So with this kind of like volume and granularity, the model can only do so much it can do. Not even mentioning the collection quality and historical bias. After all, it's the operational, administrative institution. It has its own data collection protocol, but people make error. And also, criminal justice itself, the data we collected that used to train models has a very strong historical bias. I don't think I need to spend more time to explain that. Everyone focused on criminal justice definitely knows this. With this kind of like volume and the granularity, the data and the model is very easily affected by the external influence. For example, the pandemic and the changing laws. So because the volume is very relatively low, any policy shift or pandemic hits, it will have a huge shift in the entire trend. So that's something beyond the capacity of the model. We can include as much information we can, but with the limited information that's available, that's really how much we can do. The last point I want to mention is the accumulated error. So the further you go, so that is why the projection is so hard to make. That is why the weather forecast at most tells you accurately for a week. So the further you go, the further, every model has error. The further you go, the error will accumulate, and it will just not be accurate. So a good example would be the comparison model from 6 months ago. You can actually see, based on the model that's on the current day, the first 3 months actually align pretty well with our projection 6 months ago, but there's something happened in the 4th month, so there's a huge jump. But still, if there's a cone of the margin of error, I believe the 4th month and further are still within the margin of error cone. So with all of this in mind, I still think this is an important tool, and it will be very useful because we implement a mechanism to automatically update the model every day. So every day when DOC releases new data, we will update our model and we will tell you the latest trend that we're seeing through this model. So I hope this will be an important, helpful tool to decision makers, the policymakers, and all the researchers and everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richie. So, there's so many technical questions I want to ask, but we, okay, we're going to get to the Q&A box. Most of the questions in the Q&A box are like along the lines of, what does this mean? What will the population be in 2027? What's going to happen if it's not 4,000? So I guess we need to talk about substance a little bit. So maybe we can just kick that off Joanna, maybe I can give you the next question. Maybe we can just kick that off with the data itself, get away from the projections on, I guess, on substance and understanding where we are now, tabling the projections. Is there anything else from this dashboard you want to call out that can help people understand where we are right now? And then after that, we'll get some audience questions that I think are going to go to where we're going to be down the road.
Sure. So I'd say the one thing that stood out to me the most, and I know Liz touched on this briefly, but I don't think it can be highlighted any too much, which is if you go to the recent projections tab and go down to Liz's average daily population trends by population status, I just really want to highlight that blue line that represents pretrial detention, and how. And actually, let me just so people can see it while I'm looking at it. Let me put it up here. So that light blue line representing pretrial detention status, and just first of all, how much higher it is than all the other population groups, which it usually is, but also how much more it's growing than them as well. And I think one thing that suggests, and this ties into people's many questions in the chat about what can we do to bring these numbers down? What can we do if these numbers go higher? I mean, what this really tells us is that a lot of these steps to bring these numbers down really need to focus on this pretrial population, whether that be case delay reduction measures, because right now there's a lot of case delay. There are some great strategies to reduce case delay that have been proposed by OCA recently and others. And that's all things that would bring down that pretrial population that now, as Liz said, is 10 times higher than the next closest subpopulation in here. You can also address that population by alternatives to detention while people are awaiting their cases, programs like supervised release, and other programs as well. But so yeah, I think that's really the one big thing I want to highlight is how large this population and how concerning it is that it's continuing to grow. You said, but just to stick to the content stuff, no data stuff yet.
Whatever you like.
Well, the one other thing I just wanted to highlight, which I think Richie started touching on, but I want to flag a little bit more, is just that I'm looking at this confidence interval that Richie was talking about and how, like we're projecting it a year out in the future, right? I know somebody asked in the chat that can we project out to 2027? And as Richie said, there's many things going on that make it hard to predict these models, but particularly it makes it harder to predict it the farther out you go. So we're not attempting to predict out to 2027 because we can't accurately do that. But I just want to highlight to people about this confidence interval and how you can kind of see it growing as time goes on, particularly for those reasons that Richie highlighted.
Thank you, Joanna. So, right, so now we're going to go to the Q&A box. Let me think. I'm trying to ask something that's related to what we just talked about. Okay, so obviously one of the sources of error is policy, right? So we don't know whether judges or prosecutors or other players who impact the jail population will change their practice. So right, so that's an unknown variable. So I'm gonna go to a question that I think gets at this, and maybe invite Joanna, you again, or Liz to give your answer to this. I'm gonna read one of the questions. I'll just read it as it is. Given that reported crime rates are the considered exogenous variables, can differences between observed and projected numbers be attributed to policy changes? Can we safely assume, since the population is higher than your projection, like from 6 months ago, the bail decisions have gotten stricter, or case processing has gotten slower, etc.? Or is there some other hypothesis, right? So, right, we can have causes that are rooted in crime and arrest changes or in policy changes. And Liz, you're popping on, so you want to try to put this all together. Let me rephrase this way. What are the sources of uncertainty, whether it's trends we can't control or trends we can control through policy? What are all these sources of uncertainty that create larger confidence intervals when we get to a year plus out?
Yeah. I popped up because I don't think that I emphasized it enough while I was presenting. But it is my opinion that the model that we chose is a conservative model. And by conservative, I mean we'll most likely underestimate future populations in custody. And we chose that model because this is not an operational model. It's not supposed to be used for planning specifically to a T, right? Like we don't want people in City Hall, we don't want people in the Adams administration to use this model and therefore advocate for increased jail capacity in the new borough-based jail system. So we were okay with doing that and deciding to be more conservative. So I would not be worried, especially when you're looking at that population projection section that shows that we're underestimating, that is due to anything but just unanticipated changes in the most current jail population trends that we're seeing, if that makes any sense. So like I said, we are most likely underestimating in our projections. You can see that in the projection performance section, and therefore our current projection has adjusted and is now higher. I personally don't think that is due to anything happening in the policy realm, unless I am very unaware of any changes that have happened in the last 3 to 6 months policy-wise in the city. I think it has to do mostly with the way that we decided to make our model pretty conservative.
Okay, so maybe actually I thought you were going to give one or two answers. So I want to flesh this out for the audience. So what I thought you were going to go to, on the one hand, there could be policy things that are relevant to change, which is what the question was hinting at.
Yes.
You're counting that. On the other hand, the model could be conservative, and that could explain it. And then where I thought you were going to go, I'm not pushing you to give any answer, but I wonder if now I want you to just reweigh 3 factors. Number 1, policies changed. Number 2, the model is conservative. Number 3, crime and arrest trends changed. Like we're going to continue to get this question. Maybe next month the model will slightly overstate the jail population. It'll be lower than we projected. So it's always going to be, is it something about where the model is biased? Is it something about real changes in crime and arrest? Or is it something about new policies? How can people understand that as they look at this dashboard?
Yeah, it's honestly probably a little bit of all 3 of those things. And so I think in order for us to kind of tell which factors are influencing our projections, I would tell users to take a deeper dive into the exogenous variables section. So I'm actually going to share my screen again.
Oh, and by the way, Liz,
just so that we can be looking
Liz, the next question I'm going to ask is going to be another audience question, just to tip you, where in order to have someone give an answer, I'm going to bring you to the crime trends. But anyway,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in order to understand whether it's changes in policy, whether that's an actual implementable law, or if that's just like sentencing discretion that judges are using, our model being conservative, or crime and arrest trends, I would first take a look. Well, first I would ask myself if I'm a subject matter expert and I know what's going on in New York City policy. You most likely know if there's a major policy event that has unfolded. So first I would ask myself that, if you're aware of any policy changes and how that might change the jail population that has been collected over the past couple days. And then the next thing that I would do is come down here to the exogenous variables section. And so you can kind of see, so first we'll just take a look at the crime. So the blue line, sorry, I didn't really go into detail about this, but the dark blue line here, and I will expand just this one so we can see it a little bit better. This dark blue line is the historical 30-day crime counts. This is for total misdemeanor crimes. I again used an ARIMA model to measure this behavior. And this in-sample prediction, or basically what my model looks like, is in this light blue line. So it's doing a relatively good job at predicting the total misdemeanor crimes from 2016 to current day. And then again, this red line is our projection value in addition to our confidence intervals. Here you can kind of see that we predict the next year the total misdemeanor crimes to remain relatively stagnant, if not maybe a little bit of an increase, nothing crazy. And then you can see the same for nonviolent felony crimes. It's much lower than it was historically this last year, but honestly kind of falls relatively within the average that you can see in this area. And for violent felony crimes, I would say that there's a bit of a decrease in the projection. So all of these things kind of lead towards me suggesting, and then in addition, there's the arrest counts, which show relatively the same trends, right? Either like leveling off of our future projections. And if it's like a highly seasonal variable, you'll see dips accordingly, but still kind of falling at or below what has historically happened in the last year. So yeah, that is going to play a big factor in the projections that we're seeing at the for the jail population. So I would hypothesize that if we're seeing these exogenous variables either flattening out over the last year or even decreasing, that will have an impact on the jail population, of course, probably proportionally, or like, yeah, proportionally speaking. Like if you see stagnant growth or a decrease, I would also assume you would see stagnant growth or a decrease in the jail population. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me get to the next one, and maybe we can just keep kind of unraveling and fleshing out. So I'm going to get to the question I wanted to ask. It was in consideration of the apparent increase in crime in the city, what is the plan if the population rises above the proposed level? So I guess the first thing that struck me, but I want to see, what your understanding is we've spoken so far about the model somewhat, underestimating the population based on where it was at 6 months ago. But of course, the model is still projecting way, way lower than the Department of Correction did a couple of years ago. And so I'm going to pose a hypothesis, but if you think this is dead wrong, just say so, Liz. It seems to me that when I look at those crime trends that are leveling off, and that is why both 6 months and today were lower than where the Department of Correction previously projected.
That could be the case. I think that there are other factors into why the Department of Corrections projection in particular kind of over-exaggerated what we saw historically speaking in 2023 and in 2024. So for people who are like not aware of the methods used in this DOC projection, it's all based off of admission data into DOC custody and the average length of stay of someone while incarcerated. And so it relies more heavily on admission data than it does crime and arrests. But of course, crime and arrest data impacts admission data. And so, yeah, I think that there are many reasons why their model is, overestimated what actually happened, being the fact that they predicted 2 years into the future. And there was an increase in the margin of error in their predictions over time. But also the fact that they made a big assumption, being that the average length of stay from 2019 all the way through 2024 remained stagnant at about like 3 months. And so I think that there are some things that they could have done to increase the accuracy of their projections. But I do just want to call out that our two projections are very different. And so, yeah, I would kind of come at both, like I would bring a healthy level of skepticism and interrogate both my methods and the data, the methods of the Department of Corrections. But they are different.
Okay, so Doc was too high. It looks like we are readjusting because we were a little too low 6 months ago. But still, Joanna, I'm gonna throw this at you. I want to get to the second part of this audience question. Crime could go up next year or the year after, right? So the audience member who asked this still has a question that stands. What is the plan if the population rises above proposed levels? Or I mean, answer it that way if you want, or I'll give you a second way of putting it to you. Basically, what should policymakers do if the population continues to increase or even increases by more because crime starts increasing again?
I mean, I think the answer to that question is the same as the answer to what do we do now to lower the population, which is that we have a lot of levers that can be used to lower the population as it is. So even if it goes up, those levers can still be used depending on who is driving that population going up, right? So if that population is continuing to go up because more arrests, well, then we need to come up with new interventions to reduce crime on the outside, right? But if where these numbers are going up because different pretrial decisions, because these numbers are going up because people are staying inside longer, those all require a slightly different lever to reduce the population. I started touching on some of this before, but those levers, there's many of them, and I still think one of the biggest ones we can really pull on is the case delay, reducing case length population. So I mean, even if the population goes up, if we can reduce how long people are staying in there, that's still going to make a difference in reducing the jail population overall. Right now, there's about 1,400 people who've been in Rikers for over a year, and more than 500 that have been in there for over 2 years. It doesn't need to be that high, right? If we start reducing those numbers through a variety of case delay reduction measures that I've said before OCA has outlined, we can start bringing that population down, and that would apply also to new cases coming in too, even if the population went up overall. And that includes particularly, like, I mean, if you're dealing with new cases coming in, you want to make sure those case delay measures are not just being looked at for the people who've already been in a year or two, but people who are first entering the system as well. So if we can start finding ways to move cases along in a efficient but fair way, of course, early on, we're going to kind of nip some of those cases early in the bud, really early on, so that we don't have to have people who've been in here years and years taking up space in the jails. Does that answer the question, sort of?
So what you're going for is use jail population levers that haven't been used, and you're calling out case delay as an example of an important lever.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I give you a second bite at it? And so case delay, give us one more lever that policymakers are failing to properly use that they should use. What would that be?
I think I'm not an expert at policing, but I think there are additional policing measures that could be used, like new community policing related strategies that really haven't been used as fully as they could be. So I don't mean, more police on the streets. I mean, there are people who are really in the community interacting with people, or hiring people who are maybe not police officers, who are ununiformed people to support people with either substance use programs or substance use disorders or other things like that. But then also, of course, there's programs for people who are currently awaiting the outcomes of their trials, things like supervised release and electronic monitoring, which hasn't been used much so far either.
I want to ask and answer a question myself. And then maybe I'll ask another one and give it to someone else. We had a question about the coding of gender. Is there information provided about gender expansive or non-binary people, either from DOC or in this dashboard? The answer is no, because DOC only codes in its public data set gender as binary. However, years ago, the Board of Correction stopped doing this, but years ago, an entity called the Board of Correction used to actually give weekly updates on the numbers of gender expansive or non-binary people in New York City jails. So we know that information exists, but no, it is not in data DOC makes public, and therefore it is not in any data we can scrape and pull into this dashboard. So I'm going to give a negative answer to that, and encourage whoever asked this or anyone else concerned to ask DOC to please improve their gender measure. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna I want to go to another difficult question. I don't know, Joanna, I think I'm going to come back to you again. This goes back to the jail capacity in the introduction. Again, I'm just going to read the question. The proposed capacity of the new facilities is approximately 4,000. That's right, about 4,200, or 3,300 if we go back to the original plan. Yet the question continues. Yet the projected, admittedly underestimated population is well over 6,500. That's true. That's where we're at now. What do you propose will happen with the approximately 2,500 potentially violent felony offenders that would likely be confined in the jails if there was bed capacity?
I mean, I think kind of getting back to what I was saying, if cases are moving along faster, those people would be moving on to serve their sentences at the state level. So you would move people along faster, and then you have more space for people who are starting their cases. No one's proposing we just release that, what was the number you said, 2,500 people. There's
And the implication is that 2,500 violent felony offenders might get released in order to
right.
fill the jail. So, I mean, I guess there are two questions. One is, what will happen if the jail population is too high when Rikers is supposed to close? But another question is it okay to release more violent felony offenders? And actually, most of them are not offenders because they're held pre-trial and have not been convicted of anything. But is it okay to release 2,500 people charged with violent felonies? And are there any strategies that would keep people safe if we released more of those people? So I think the first question is, what happens if it's too high in August 2027? And another question is, if what happens is we need to suddenly release people in a hurry, how can we do that safely?
So, I mean, we know that most people who are charged with violent felonies, like Mike said, have not been convicted of anything. But also, we know that most of them don't go on to commit other violent crimes. The proportion of people that who are charged with violent felony who are released, which many people are, do not go on to commit violent crimes. We hear about the people that do in the news, and obviously every single one of those is a tragedy, but the large proportion don't. And for those of the people that, judges or prosecutors or defense attorneys are worried that could commit another violent crime, there are a lot of strategies in place to address that. Supervised release program, which now have a variety of level of supervision levels that can be used, electronic monitoring, and alternatives to incarceration post-disposition as well.
Do a few more quick questions. We're a little bit over time. I want to do a few more quick questions and then ask everyone to do closing. Maybe there are a few I can answer. Can I take a question that came up because it'll provide an opportunity to direct people to another resource? Can your system capture how many individuals die under the care of the DOC? No, that's not what our dashboard was created to do. We don't track deaths in custody. But what I want to direct people to is what I would view as essentially a complementary tool to the one we rolled out. If anyone wants to Google NYC controller Rikers, they're going to get to a different type of Rikers dashboard produced by the NYC controller that focuses more on indicators of violence, and it does capture deaths in custody by doc. Okay, so it's a different dashboard, complements ours, and does have information on deaths in custody. Okay, I want to do something else. Oh, there's a technical question I see at the top of the list. Oh my goodness, there are so many questions. Can we talk about racial disparities? Joanna, Liz, Richie, can we talk about racial disparities? And then maybe we'll go to closing from there. Okay, where is it? Racial disparities. What oh, I just had it. Where's the question? What Well, now I'm losing it. The question was basically, what can be done to address the racial disparities that you're displaying on this dashboard? So, who wants that? Liz, Joanna, can we just talk about racial disparities before we close out? What steps, studies, and proposals has your organization made towards addressing the racial disparity? All right, Joanna, that's going to be for me or you. Do you want to take it before I do a non-moderator thing and answer it?
Why don't you take it, Mike?
All right. I'm going to take that. So a couple of years ago, we actually put out a report that was all about racial disparities in the NYC jail population. Perhaps our colleague Sarah Monahan, who's with us, can put that in the chat. So that is more on the problem of racial disparities. What can be done about this? I'm going to point directly to bail decisions, which is a good case in point. We know from research by ourselves and others that there are racial disparities in judges' bail decisions in New York City right now. There's something on the order of a 10 percentage point gap between judges in bail eligible cases setting bail when people are Black as compared to when they are white. However, the only legal criterion in New York for setting bail is if someone poses a risk of flight. And we also know that evidence on failure to return to court indicates there is a zero disparity based on race in people's likelihood of returning to court. So I think a good starting point for addressing racial disparities is to try to work with judges on why they might be, what about the characteristics or the criminal histories, or what are the things they're looking at that are leading to more bail setting with Black than white people, when it doesn't appear as if there's any more risk of failure to appear in court. So I would start there. And then I just want to call out the importance of intent. You know, a lot of reforms have intended to reduce racial disparities and have not done so. Bail reform is one example. Bail reform has reduced pretrial detention, but has not reduced racial disparities. In San Francisco and other places, people are starting to look intentionally about the effect of policies based on race. And so you have things called racial impact statements or racial impact analyses, where you sort of anticipate the likely racial impact of your reforms based on who in a population it might affect, and whether it's going to just disproportionately help white people, or whether it's going to be evenly distributed, or whether it would make up for racial disparities. So that can be another tool that perhaps we should use more often in our reforms. Do an analysis in advance and look at who is eligible for these reforms, what is their race, and if you don't see that it's likely to reduce disparities, think about changing the reforms. Or if you implement the reforms and you're not having an effect, then think about what you need to do to reduce disparities. Whereas I think our history shows primarily a tendency towards race-neutral approaches, which often don't work. Okay, so judges' decisions and a more explicit awareness of the disparities and the impact of new policies in affecting them. Okay, I gave a long answer to a question. I wasn't supposed to do that in the moderator. We have lots of other great questions that we're not going to get to because we're 15 minutes over time. Let's do two things. Let's, Richie, Joanna, and Liz, do closing thoughts from each of you. And let's let our audience know that all of these questions I didn't ask were great questions. And we are going to save the Q&A box to think about these questions, but also you can reach us. We're at dcj@jjay.cuny.edu. Anyone who has a specific question, I see a few we didn't get to that are very specific. If you re-ping us on your questions, we would love to answer them. Okay, so thank you to the audience for that. Richie, we haven't gotten to you in a bit. How about you open us up with closing thoughts? What do you want people to learn from this conversation? And
So
what are you worried people might think they learned from this conversation that could be a misinterpretation? Or any other closing thoughts you have?
So I'm a data guy, so I'm just going to talk about this question from data perspective. So data is powerful, and statistical modeling or machine learning or any kind of like data science technology that's been widely used nowadays can solve a lot of problems, can give us a lot of insight to a problem that's been bothering us for like decades and or even centuries. But the data and model also have limitation. Like I just said, maybe the accumulated error can't really give us a precise projection into a long further future. Or maybe sometimes the presentation of the number give us like a false hope. And after a while, it's like the number is not telling the real story, and we lose faith in the number. That's something we should be careful about, and we should have faith in, because as more and more agencies are publicizing their data, and more and more people get their hands on the data science tools and skills, I believe with more this similar tools available in the criminal justice domain, I think our policymakers and whoever cares about this topic in the society will have more insight. And again, we are not making decision or any recommendation there. I see a lot of the question that in the chat box. I see deep passion from the people that care about this topic, but I do believe if we believe in data, if we have more skills on or more passion on the using the data as a powerful tool, it will guide us to the right direction.
Thank you so much. Joanna, same question for you. What do you hope people learn? What are you worried they might think they learned that could be a misinterpretation, or any other closing comment you have?
Yeah. I mean, I hope people see that, we're not moving in the direction we want to be to close Rikers, but that is inevitable, that we can bring those numbers down. If you look at the first page of Liz's amazing dashboard, there's a variety of proposed solutions there. I've outlined some too. Liz is linked with a number of great links that you can learn more about ways to reduce this population. So I think, numbers are going up, but I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism, and that we should be using, just as we saw that the predictions model varies because of policy changes. Those policy changes can continue to come, and hopefully come in ways that will help us bring the population back down. And that's very doable, I think.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Liz, same question. What do you hope people learned from this conversation? What are you worried people might be confused by or might think they learned that could be a misinterpretation, or anything else you want to say?
Yeah, for sure. I created this tool to have a little bit of something for everyone. And I think that this conversation had a heavy emphasis on the projections, which was really great. But I just want to lift up all of the other really incredible information on this dashboard, from the homepage to the recent populations and the gender and racial disparities. That being said, I really wanted to bring a tool with accurate but also really compelling information to help inspire impactful, data-driven policy changes that has the ability to improve New Yorkers' lives. And we selected a model that blends both subject matter expertise, thank you, Mike, for all of the information that you taught me throughout this entire process, but in addition to mathematical rigor, right? So we did prioritize transparency and interpretability so that the users can really understand the story behind the numbers that we're making available to the public. It's our hope, it's my hope, that this tool not only informs policymakers, advocates, and the general public about the current state on Rikers Island and the potential future state, but I also really wanted to make sure that we were providing people that were interested the valuable data that is kind of seamlessly like not available to the public because of the way that the Department of Corrections publishes their data sets. So I hope that people really use that downloadable data set on the recent trends tab to access insights and do their own research. And again, just as Joanna said, like I want to really leave this webinar off on a positive note that like I myself, and I believe the Data Collaborative for Justice believes that we can reduce the jail population to successfully close Rikers and put an end to the inhumane conditions that people are subjected to every single day while in custody. And I would urge lawmakers, people in City Hall, to look at this resource not as an excuse to increase the population of the borough-based jails, which they will not do, but as a call to action to reinvest in programs that have historically worked to reduce population. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Liz. And I guess I want to conclude by not answering my own question, but by going back to something that you just said and something Richie said. I want to go back to what Richie said earlier. No projection of something dynamic like a local jail population is going to be perfect. The Department of Correction and their projection they put out several years ago was off by about 900 people. They were too high by about 900. Our own projection, we've already advertised, underestimated by certainly a lot less than 900, but we've already advertised transparently that 6 months ago, we were lower than we are now. But Richie, the answer you gave earlier is that that's not all that's important. What's important is that we're not doing a one-time only projection and sticking people with it for 2 years because it will update every day. And so going back, to what Liz said, people in positions of power can take action to reduce the jail population. And what I think Richie you pointed to is that in that event, the projection algorithm is going to adjust the trajectory downward and show that adjustment. Or if the policymakers implement well-intentioned strategies, but they're poorly implemented and have no impact, then the projections won't show a change. And then we'll be able to, in real time, very swiftly see that something's going wrong with our reform. So I think, Liz, as you said, the goal is not to be defeatist. The goal is to confront data that's credible while recognizing that human beings have the opportunity and the power to change the course of that data. So thank everyone. Thank you all for your work for being on this panel. I want to thank Richie, Joanna, Liz. This was great. I want to thank the audience. I want to apologize for not getting to all of these great questions. Please ping us if you want to repeat them. We will post the video from this event. And and I'm supposed to tell everyone about our next event, which will not be a webinar like this one. Rather, on December 12th, we will be co-hosting with the From Punishment to Public Health Research Center, Public Health's Role in the Criminal Legal System. That will be our next event. It will be December 12th, 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. You can come to that in person at John Jay College or hybrid. It will be, it's already been publicized and we'll continue to provide details down the line. Okay, I was supposed to do that. With that, thank you everyone who stayed with us. Ping us with your questions. Thank you so much. We're done.